I'm Sam Roberts of the New York Times, and welcome to the New York Times Close Up. This week, Richard Esposito will join me to talk about his new biography of the late journalist Jimmy Breslin. We'll discuss his brand of tabloid poetry, his unique reporting methods, and the personal life that molded him. But first, in his culture-defining book, Primary Colors, based on Bill Clinton's 1992 presidential campaign, Joe Klein laid the groundwork for our understanding of the media's role in modern politics. He argues in a Times opinion essay that more hinges on this year's election than ever before. Joe also writes the Sanity Clause column on Substack. Joe, welcome and thank you for joining us. This essay you wrote in the New York Times, you say that it evoked Beirut in 1978, a war zone. Why is that?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on, Sam. And it's interesting. Patrick Healy from the Times called me up and said, "Look, we have all of these columns, about Trump and about how terrible he is, and everybody knows who Trump is. Could you try and make the case for Kamala?" And so that's what I tried to do. And to me, the most important part of the case is that she represents stability. It's a kind of small c conservative case. And it brought me back to, I was thinking about Beirut last week in any case because of the Israeli offensive against Hezbollah. And it was the first war zone that I visited in 1978. And there were lots of wars going on. The Israelis had just moved into southern Lebanon, but the country itself was falling apart with various local and religious and ideological militias fighting each other. And I saw these two militias fighting each other, lobbing rocket-propelled grenades and small arms fire, fighting each other over a Holiday Inn. And I thought, wow, maybe civilization isn't the rock solid thing that I, as an American, always assumed it was.
Joe, we have a democracy that elected Donald Trump in 2016. We survived that. Why should we be so worried about 2024? Don't we have enough institutions safeguarding democracy? Don't we have checks and balances? Why be so worried? And what does it say about democracy if almost half or even more than half of Americans think he would make a better president? Isn't that what democracy is all about?
Well, democracy isn't foolproof. And in fact, if you have enough fools in a society, it becomes kind of a dangerous thing. We have lived through a period of unprecedented affluence, and we have lost the ceremonies of civility and of democracy. It's really hard to have a democracy without citizens. This is something I learned, after 9/11, when I spent a lot of time with the U.S. military, both in Iraq and Afghanistan and here at home. And that's a community that understands that responsibility is part of being a citizen. Far too many of our fellow citizens have lost that sense. And so to answer the top part of your question, though, Donald Trump has done massive damage over the last 10 years to a great many of the institutions that we're proud of. He's questioned the FBI, he's questioned the intelligence community, he's questioned the courts, he's questioned the electoral process. This past week, he has been outrageously questioning the actions of the Federal Emergency Management Agency after the hurricanes. And the situation obviously has gotten worse over the last 10 years. That is why we need to stand with stability. Now, there are a couple of other things that Kamala Harris has done that that also make me feel better about her than I have about Democrats in the recent past. One is that she's moved away from identity politics, um, and another is that she's optimistic. Far too often in the recent past, Democrats have followed the lead of the academic left and felt that, oh, America's a big mess, it's unfair, we're racist, there's structural racism, there's all this and that and the other. But we're the luckiest people in the history of the world. And it was striking to me, covering 11 presidential campaigns, that you never heard Democrats talk about the remarkable triumph of the last 60 years, which has been the human rights triumphs of civil rights, gay rights, women's rights, uh, rights of Latinos and others. Uh, this has been a remarkable achievement on our part. Dems don't talk about it, but this year, Kamala's slogan, "We're not going back," assumes that progress. And that to me is very refreshing for a Democrat.
Joe, if we've had so much progress, and you pointed out in the Times essay, crime is down, illegal immigration is down, inflation is down, our economy, as you said, is the envy of the world, then why are so many people, and maybe a majority of Americans, supporting Donald Trump?
Because they haven't been to Beirut, because they haven't been to a war zone, because they don't understand. They think that what we have is permanent and immutable. And they don't understand that if we don't guard and curate and nurture our democracy, we could lose it.
What are you afraid that he would do?
What am I afraid that he would do? I'm afraid that he would do what he says he's going to do. I'm afraid that he's going to try to sick the military on his fellow citizens. I'm afraid that he will move against, a free press. I'm afraid, more importantly, that he won't spend the time and effort on making sure our government works properly. He certainly didn't in his first term, and we need the government to work properly. We need the regulatory apparatus that controls our free enterprise system. We need to have a properly functioning democracy in the world. We need our allies overseas, and he has spoken against them. We need to confront Vladimir Putin, and we need to confront Xi Jinping, and we need to deal with the Iranians. And he has been. It's not something new in American life. It happened 100 years ago when this country turned nativist, isolationist, and protectionist. The tariffs he's proposing would be an economic disaster. But we're talking about Donald Trump again. We're not talking about Kamala
All right,
Harris.
let's talk about Kamala Harris very quickly. What does she have to do in the next few weeks to win?
Well, I think that she has to be a little bit less stage managed by her consultants. Going on Fox, as she did last night, is a good first step. But I'd like to see her doing a lot more town meetings, talking to average people, fielding their questions. I mean, part of the problem with doing interviews with people like us is that we are gotcha addicted. You watched Brett Baer last night, and he acted like a crazy man. He wouldn't let her finish a sentence. And I think that, to me, the great events of presidential campaigns during my lifetime have been the town meeting debates, where the candidates actually had to take questions from average citizens. I think it got Bill Clinton elected president. I think it got Barack Obama elected president. And I think it got George W. Bush elected president. The presidency is our most intimate office. We're electing somebody to live in our house for the next 4 years. And I think that people want to be confident that the person they're voting for will not become an unwelcome guest.
Joe, a final question. If you were posing as an average citizen, what would you ask Kamala Harris?
I'd ask her, about the most important question in American life, which is race. I would ask her whether she supports DEI, diversity, equity, and investment programs. I'd ask her what she thinks about the Supreme Court's decision on affirmative action. I'd ask her what she thinks about the fact that there's been so much progress in the Black community, that there's now a middle class and a professional class. I live in an integrated upper middle class neighborhood in New Rochelle that wouldn't have existed 60 years ago. I'd ask her to comment on that and what more needs to be done.
Thanks to Joe Klein, the author of 7 books, the author of the Sanity Clause newsletter on Substack. Thank you for joining us, Joe. And coming up next, an insightful and comprehensive new biography about the life and work of my former colleague, Jimmy Breslin. Richard Esposito is my former colleague at the Daily News, drawing from extensive interviews, his own experiences, and the cooperation of the Breslin family. Richard Esposito has put together a unique portrait of one of the most influential and gifted American journalists. His book is titled Jimmy Breslin, The Man Who Told the Truth. The book just published, and Richie, does it suggest that other people weren't telling the truth at that time, or that people don't tell the truth anymore?
Yeah, that's a really great question, Sam, because as you know, we devoted ourselves to facts. And Jimmy devoted himself to taking facts and using the facts that he gathered to convey what he felt was the truth. The rest of us told the truth to the best of our ability, but we told it through facts. He felt he could make the leap to making you feel what was the truth to a story. As you know, you had to edit him, which was fun.
Yes, fun, and it's a good way of describing it, yeah. Well, but there were things he made up, there were characters he created, so people read some of his stuff with an air of disbelief. How real were they, and how much of it should people have believed, and is true the same as truth?
Yeah, well, true and truth are two different things, as you point out. But as Tom Wolfe said, they were colleagues when they were 20-something years old at the Herald Tribune in 1963. He watched Jimmy work, and he said he never saw anybody better on deadline, go out, get all the facts. Then there are those characters. So those characters are based on real people. They're composites of people. There was once an editor who didn't believe they were true, and he went out to a bar in Queens, and he was converted. Gloria Steinem worked with Jimmy at New York Magazine, and she met Marvin the Torch, and she met Klein the lawyer, and she knew what other people didn't understand. They were real people. What Jimmy did was he told stories through them, and he also used them to convey humor, which, as you know, as he put it, newspapers sometimes have about as much humor as an auto accident. Mm-hmm. And you needed that when you were running a paper. You had to have somebody who had a character like Fat Thomas, this 485-pound bookmaker who never won anything. Jimmy would make you laugh.
He'd make you laugh, and we could sure use laughs these days. What would he be doing today? Could he survive as the same kind of columnist today? And how would he fare online as opposed to in print?
You know, I remember the day he called me up and he said, I'm done with you. I'm only working on the internet now. He saw it coming. He saw the gale that was going to change the world that we thought would never end. How would he fare? He would fare well. He would look at people like Eric Adams and say, what am I going to write about a guy that wears 2 hats, a Yankee and a Met symbol on a hat? And he would know exactly what to write about that, and people would want to read it.
He'd write about the ampersand.
Exactly,
yeah.
Exactly. So, you know, what kind of audience would he have? Telling the truth, one of the people I work with sent me a note, one of the young women I work with, she said, what he did, transparency and truth, is all Gen Z wants to know when they buy something. So in her opinion, she's 30-something, Jimmy would do a good job in this current world.
He also said something all the time that a lot of people kind of forget. He said the secret to what he did was a four-letter word, W-O-R-K, and he did work. I mean, people might think he sat there and mused a lot, but he walked upstairs, he walked up in housing projects, he met people, he did all that legwork, all that shoe leather.
As you used to say, he slapped those feet up the stairs every day. And the other thing about work is what he warned you when you thought you might take a day off because you weren't feeling so well. Mm-hmm. He said, Wally Pipp.
And I said, who's Wally Pipp? And he told me.
And his last game was what was the next? The relief guy came in for 2,000 games?
I think his name was Lou Gehrig.
Yeah, that was his name.
Yeah. I never took a day off after that.
Yeah, and that was his idea of work, just work.
And what distinguished him? What made him so different? There were a lot of other columnists. There was Pete Hamill, of course, Mike Daly, Mike McAlery. There were others like that. What made Jimmy so different?
Well, what made Jimmy different is something like what made Mozart different. He was good when he was born. He had a natural talent, and that natural talent is different from these other guys. He took work, as you know, he started earlier, he worked later, he stayed later. But when he found a story, he made it his story. And he made it the only story he felt you needed to know that day, whether it was the death of Kennedy, the parking violation scandal back in the 80s, or Occupy Wall Street. All the rest of us saw thousands of people in Zuccotti Park. What he saw was the same thing he saw in Selma, Alabama. People who didn't have anything asking for part of something. And he wrote it in a way, and I was working at ABC then, none of us wrote it that way. He was the only one who went in there and saw what was going on and called it that way. That's what made him different.
Did he grow up wanting to be a writer?
His first newspaper, Sam, he was 10 years old when he wrote his first newspaper. And he started with what he knew was the best thing, Dude Killed. He knew that would sell his newspaper at 10. And you know, because you had a newspaper at 10 when you were a kid, and you put it on your parents' floor. Jimmy's first newspaper didn't come out for a couple of weeks. And he put in a note in saying, we apologize, it didn't come out. And the reason it didn't come out is he went by a neighbor's house and watched her taking her sweater off in the window. And he thought he'd write that in the paper. And when they read it in school, they collected all the copies and they said, not this issue.
Mm-hmm. Too soon for that. Was
soon.
he in sync with his readers? I mean, he always seemed to be a little ahead of them, maybe a little more liberal than them. Why did people like that keep reading him? And especially when he started writing for Newsday and the readership was more suburban too.
You know, people didn't want him to go to Newsday. But you know what? Those suburban people were the children of his readers in New York. Those are the people from Queens who moved to Long Island. And so they got the same thing from him. It's like I was talking to a cop the other night, a good cop, and he said, you know, you never knew what he was going to say about you, so you wanted to know. And he was ahead of his readers, but he was for his readers. And that's why he was so valuable to a paper. His reader would wake up in the morning and Jimmy would say, here's what Ed Koch is doing. Here's what Donald Trump is doing. Hey, Albert Gore Jr., I thought he was the greatest thing when he came into politics. Now he's Al Gore, and he's out there with Ed Koch, and he's bringing a little bit of the South to New York, running on race. He called it that way, and you read it and said, I didn't know that.
He was motivated, it seemed to me, most by outrage. That got him going more than anything else. Is that right?
I think outrage, pain, and loss were three qualities that he had since he was a boy. And Pete Hamill said once, that little boy always lived inside. Underneath that tough guy was that little boy. And the reason he was close to Pete was Pete could see the little boy. And Jimmy couldn't play the tough guy with Pete. Once, Mario Cuomo and Jimmy went to a bar, the governor, and Jimmy picked a fight with people. And the next thing you know, Mario Cuomo looked up and he was all alone in the bar.
Sounds right. Now, there were a lot of people Jimmy didn't like. He wrote columns about people he wasn't talking to. He forgot why he wasn't talking to them. Were there any people he did like?
Well, first, he liked Mario Cuomo, and he was a friend. He would like people and then not like them. He liked Hugh Carey because Hugh Carey could do math and he helped save the city. And then one day Hugh Carey started plucking his eyebrows and wearing tuxedos, and suddenly he was Society Carey, and Jimmy turned his back. There was a photographer named Mickey Brennan. Jimmy loved this photographer. He was the guy that Muhammad Ali thought understood him. And he was that good a photographer. He captured the sweat on a heavyweight champion in a way that it looked like rainfall. And Jimmy loved Mickey Brennan. Jimmy loved children. When my daughter first met Jimmy, she was crying, and Jimmy said, "Watch the magic." And suddenly she was happy. He adored his grandchildren. He adored his wife, Rosemary. He adored Ronnie and his two daughters that sadly died too young. And he told you what Pete said about him. Women were that important to Jimmy.
Mm-hmm. Why is there no Jimmy Breslin today? I mean, maybe there is, and I'm just not reading him or finding him or her. But it seems that no one is filling that role, certainly in terms of New York news, New York coverage.
You know, it's in terms of city coverage that it's missing. So at the paper where you work, you might have Paul Krugman talking about the economy, or Gail Collins with her wonderful sense, or even Maureen Dowd. But they're not out there every day looking at the government of a city or a state. That's missing. In San Francisco, the paper no longer has a Herb Cain. The paper is no longer almost a paper. So my hope is that we're in the surf of a new thing. Just like when journalism became what it was when we were there. That was a 50-year period only. And I think those voices will emerge. You have people like Ben Smith who are incredibly competent and really know news. You have people who are capable. The question is, can the audiences get out of the silos? Mm-hmm. And that's, I think that's what we've got.
Well, is that such a problem that information has become so diffuse now that you really couldn't have a character with the breadth and the audience that someone like Jimmy did have?
No, one of the things that was wonderful about the old centralized distribution of newspapers and news was that Jimmy could have a character that you read for years. The character would reappear, and the themes were like short stories. That is missing with the siloed world now, and curating your own news, sometimes you miss what other people might want to tell you, and that's a problem.
Why did you decide to do this book?
I decided, Sam, to do this book because Jimmy, first of all, Jimmy meant a lot to me as a kid, as a copy boy. Before that, when I was selling newspapers in my mother's candy store. But Jimmy taught us how to report. For all of his gruffness and his screaming, if you followed his methods and stayed to the end of a story, you would always get something. So I decided to do this book because Jimmy changed journalism. Jimmy, Tom Wolfe, Gay Talese, Pete Hamill, they brought storytelling back. And
it wasn't really the new journalism, it was the old journalism.
No, and Tom Wolfe said the garbage barge of history is filled with movements that begin with the word new. And they believed they were the old journalists. They were going to tell stories. And that made Jimmy special. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to write this book, was so that younger people, I hoped, could understand that this was what storytelling needed to be.
It's what storytelling needed to be, and it's what you can learn a lot about storytelling and have a very enjoyable read as well. Richard Esposito, the book Jimmy Breslin, The Man Who Told the Truth. Coming up next, my thoughts on a requiem for Mayor Adams. There's a rush to judgment to dump Mayor Adams. With the Democratic primary more than 6 months away, it's way too soon to write him off. Let's assume he doesn't resign. He says he won't. He's not a quitter. Can he still salvage his mayoralty? The equilibrium between Albany and New York is not quite parallel to what it was in the 1970s. In the fiscal crisis, Governor Carey all but preempted Abe Beame as mayor. But Governor Hochul appears to be fastidiously overseeing the house cleaning going on at City Hall. Loyalty is a virtue. Cronyism isn't. The departure of the mayor's enablers from the administration isn't an exodus, it's an eviction, one that would have been unnecessary if Adams had widened his circle of trust to begin with. Watch closely whom he names as police commissioner and whether the purge includes the mayor's pals at Police Plaza. There's another factor to consider in the mayor's future. You can't beat something with nothing. Ranked choice voting may be unpredictable, but incumbency is a formidable asset. Andrew Cuomo begins with name recognition and cash, but is freighted with baggage. So stop and think. Can you name your favorite candidate to replace Adams? Still another factor is the criminal case against the mayor. More details, even more charges, may be coming. But what we've seen so far leaves some reasonable doubts. As Professor Andrew Weissman of NYU writes in Vital City, the indictment suggests that Adam leveraged illegal campaign contributions from foreigners to collect $10 million in public matching funds. Yes, the campaign received $10 million, but after 15,000 people contributed. No way were all of them fronting for foreigners. Also, the courts have made it absurdly hard for prosecutors to prove corruption. The government has to demonstrate that there was a specific trade of some action agreed upon before the benefit was received, that the action was related to his public duties, that it provided an actual government benefit, and that the bribe was directly linked to that benefit. Indeed, most of the luxury travel perks that Adams glommed came before the benefit mentioned in the indictment. That leaves a lot of wiggle room between the quid and the quo, and a long time between now and the next election. For the New York Times and CUNY TV, I'm Sam Roberts. And don't forget to download the CUNY TV app. You can catch our weekly program on the go, anytime, anywhere.